Yuri Marmerstein is a teacher, actor, stuntman, performer, physical arts enthusiast, and student of life. If you ask him, Yuri will humbly tell you, I'm just a guy who tries to do stuff. When you follow him on social media at Yuri underscore Marmerstein on Instagram, or even Yuri's beard for the true fan of Yuri, you will see that he is far from just a guy trying to do stuff. Yuri is an incredibly gifted performer, and he's a wonderful teacher that I have had time to spend, that I've had the chance to spend time with. And I cannot highly recommend him enough. So seek him out, grab some time with him, grab some of his online offerings, and just follow along for all of his cool stuff. So, welcome, Yuri Marmerstein, to the Breath Pack podcast. Thanks for giving me your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, I met Yuri actually in person in February of 2023. And I engaged him to work with me on some cool new superhero esque type of skills. I had been following Yuri for quite some time. I was thinking back before this interview of like, how did I find Yuri? And I think what it was that I was seeking out guidance for handstand work because I've been working on my freestanding handstand for a couple of years, probably a good solid several months before I found Yuri, and then got a hold of his course on handstand work through Reps, which is a really excellent course. And then I just became fascinated with Yuri's philosophies and his approach and his outlook on movement, and then just started following until I engaged him for an in-person meeting. And that was a lot of fun, and also got me more insight into who Yuri is a little bit and how he approaches things, which was a really fun experience because Yuri's approach is very different, as you might hear on this podcast today and find as you follow him and get to know him. So I'd like to start, if it's okay, Yuri, with kind of where are you from? What got you into the doing stuff that you do now, and how did you land in East Tennessee?
Yeah, I still figuring all that out. I was originally from also complicated with borders. It was former Soviet Union, it's present day Ukraine. Emigrated to the US when I was young. I was 5 years old, grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. At a certain point, basically without going too deep, Um, I followed the path. I went to high school. I was weird in high school, but we all are, or we're lying to ourselves. Went to college, got a degree in physics, got a job in the field, and then basically after that job ran its course, I was a contractor, so I was working long hours, but I got paid overtime. So instead of taking the salaried position and doing that full time, I kind of had this realization. I don't know if this is for me, and I don't know if this is the path that I want to follow. So I kind of just did something else, started coaching gymnastics, which was like the opposite. It was basically something that I was very passionate about at the time. And the job, it went from 60 to 80 hours a week to part time, like 30 hours a week at a much lower pay rate, but I was able to train, I was able to do the stuff that I wanted. And then at a certain point, I uh I felt kind of stagnant in Ohio, like the stuff that I want to do, there's not a lot of people here better than me. So my first thought was actually moving to LA to do stunts. Ended up going to Vegas instead to do kind of more circus live performance. Did that for a while. I was in Vegas for about 10 years. Ended up moving to Tennessee kind of randomly after all of the COVID nonsense and all of that. Still figuring a lot of things out, but essentially doing stuff. Yeah, I just like to do stuff. There was that point where I got a taste of the office work. I got a taste of what a quote unquote real job would be, what a lot of people are kind of conditioned to believe that they're supposed to do. And I was there too. Like I wasn't sure. what's the right path? I don't think there's a right path, but I think if you only have one life, why would you give so much of that to sitting in a desk 8 hours a day, and that goes from school to work, and then, like, what, that's your life, and then the stuff that you're passionate about, you only get to do a sliver of it on the weekends? Yeah, so, um I just like to do stuff. If I really get into something, I'll get a bit obsessed about it. And at a certain point for me, that was martial arts, acrobatics, gymnastics, handstands, weightlifting, uh, movement, if you want to call it. It's a buzzword now, but I guess movement encompasses all of those things and many more. And then hitting also different points where it's like, I wanna be able to do everything. So it's not just a lot of people know me for handstands, but there was never a point that I did just handstands because I like all the other stuff. I think everything has a lesson you can learn from it, and I like the idea of adaptability. So it's like you can do one thing really well, that's fantastic, but what if I throw something different at you? How well can you adapt to that? How well can you repurpose what you know? So for me, it's not just learning one thing, it's you learn one thing, and then how can you use the lessons from learning that thing to build your adaptation to the next thing? And there's not one right answer to this, but that's kind of the idea. You get thrown into strange water, how quickly can you learn to swim?
No, you said a mouthful and all that. That's great. I want to just really quickly
Yeah.
touch on how you glossed over that you got a degree in physics. I'm sure that the listeners did not miss that,
It
but
was
just
just a
that.
bachelor's degree, basically. I never, like, took it. I was considering taking it to that path of master's and PhD, but, I don't think I would have enjoyed that. And then
Yeah,
also, like, again, because I was so into the physical arts, and not
yeah,
trying to disrespect by any means, but, like, you look at the people that are in that industry for a long time and what they look like and how they move, and it's generally they don't move very well. So that's
right.
kind of another thing that swayed my path is it's like, okay, these guys spend a lot of time in the lab. They're all super genius, intelligent. They understand the stuff at a level that I can't, obviously, but also like, what's does their health look like? What does their physicality look like? Because that's, for me, one of the bigger inspirations in general, like, as an athlete, as a performer, is not the young guys that are doing crazy stuff, but the people that are older that are still doing the stuff. Because if they're doing it okay, you do crazy stuff when you're 19, fantastic. Are you doing the same kind of stuff at 45, 55, and beyond? Where at the very
Right.
least, are they doing, maybe they're not doing the same tricks that they did when they were 19, but they're still doing the same discipline. Because for me, one of the biggest downers when I see like a coach who's older is, oh yeah, I used to do this stuff, but I don't anymore. Like if the thing that you do is that great, why don't you do it anymore? At least to a
Yeah,
basic level. Like, and in gymnastics, that's one of the things I've seen a lot. Part of it is they train so hard as kids, I understand. Like, it's something that they don't get as much enjoyment from because they put so much hard effort at a time in their life when they probably just wanted to play and goof around. But yeah, at the same time, it's like if you love this thing so much, why don't you still participate in it, at least at a basic level?
and that's one reason that I was so excited to bring you on this podcast, Yuri, because I love this philosophy that you have about keeping movement and keeping the things that you love to do and that you're curious about right in the forefront, and not setting limitations on age. Like Yuri and I are close to the same age. In fact, I think I might be older than you. I don't know. I'm 47. And like since I've been following Yuri and met Yuri and interacted with Yuri, that's like only a few years ago did I really start doing my tumbling? Did I start working on handstands? Did I start really noticing that mobility and movement are really more important than training just for a certain skill, like you already mentioned? If you're like in bodybuilding, where I'm at, if you're only training the body for the aesthetic and the physique, you can really miss out on feeling good and moving well. And I think that in all of, no matter what the modality, whether it be marathoning, whether it be bodybuilding, that there's a lot of aspects of, especially what Yuri shares on his Instagram page right now, of different stretches and different movement enhancement exercises, if you will, for a better lack of a better word, of just things that will help you increase mobility of certain joints. So that why not keep doing it? And like, you, to your point, you're like, I think there's a point where some people take what they love to do as a kid, and then they are taught they need to go into the real job world, or they're too old for this, or something distracts them, and then they don't really believe that they could work their way back to it. Because like right now, I used to be able to do a front walkover in heels, doing a can like 20 times a week when I was 20. But I've lost some of that mobility and also that courage to do it now. And so I'm working my way back. I don't believe that I can't do it again. It's just a matter of flexibility and mobility are just as important as working on like strength and endurance as we approach it. You just have to work at it.
Yeah, people put such limitations on themselves, and like as always, you have to be realistic, right? If someone's 50 years old, they say, "I want to learn a handstand so I can get into the Olympics 2024." Like, okay, let's be realistic. That's not going to happen. But okay, I want to learn a handstand because my granddaughter is doing it, and I want to be able to take a photo. And I've had someone actually in their 60s who that was their goal. That's a fantastic goal. It's like being realistic, and again, not putting that limitation. Because so many people before they even try say, "Oh, I can't move like that. Oh, it hurts watching." Well, that's on you. That's not on me. Like you get put in this world that, okay, you play as a kid and then you stop playing and then you sit and then you have to sit now for 8 hours a day because that's the mature thing to do. Like it's interesting some of the comments I get on my Facebook, like I think I had a cartwheel video, and one comment was, "Oh, there's starving children in the world. Well, how can you be doing cartwheels at a time like this?" Like, bro, those starving children are probably doing cartwheels. Like, it's not. And then this lot of interesting lessons. I had this hip mobility video go viral. It's at like 7 million views now, and a lot of the comments are like, "Oh, you need a disclaimer. People aren't meant to move that way. This guy's in real good shape, but if someone else is going to try that, they're going to break themselves." Like if that's the attitude that you have, what do you think is going to happen when you step outside on the snow and you slip and fall? Like, and again, I don't think it's not like I'm showing backflips where, okay, don't try this without a spot or without a professional. This is like hip rotations and leg swings. And also,
Hmm.
common sense, like, yeah, I'm moving pretty fast because I've been doing this every day for 20 years. Maybe if you that looks too fast for you, just go slower. Don't go as high. But yeah, some of these ideas that people have of what movement is supposed to be and what shouldn't be and putting themselves in that box, like, I can't move like that. Those are
Well,
basic
and we're
human
taught,
movements.
right. And that we're taught, and it's that adulting expectation that people think that you're supposed to suffer and get old and lose all your facilities. And Yuri and I are here to challenge that with people, because if you really look back, I always like to take it back to like caveman thought of like, what were humans really built, like what did we evolve into and what have we evolved into? And like movement, running, like walking, like different like functional movements is what we need. Sitting for 8 hours a day, it's no wonder you feel like garbage if you're sitting, like unless you're sitting and meditating for a specific reason for 8 hours or something, that conditioned like chronic sitting, and also not moving because we're stressed and we're too busy and we're not making time. When I used to work in personal training, a lot of people would be like, well, I don't have the energy to add a workout. And they forget that energy builds energy. And as you add movement, even if it's just right now hearing this, that you take a 5 minute walk today, and that's more movement than you've done in a week, you can build it. But it's just, it is available to you at any time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to. It's just You're sitting, get up and move around, and it should be reflexive, right? It should be like, "Hey, I've been sitting for an hour. My body feels the need to open up and stretch a little bit," just like a cat that's been sleeping, right? Animals reflexively stretch, and that's why they don't have to do stretching routines because it's integrated in what they naturally do. And kids have that as well, right? Kids feel this need to move like, "Hey, I have energy. I need to run around." And then what? No, you have to sit. You have to sit still. Why can't you sit still? Like, of course, more kids are having problems paying attention these days because I can't pay attention when I'm forced to sit still for 8 hours either.
No,
Like when
I'm terrible.
when I'm taking a seminar, even if it is like a PowerPoint, I like to be moving. For me to sit still, yeah, it's not. Of course, everybody has their own way of paying attention, but yeah, part of it is society, and then you get conditioned to believe that, "Oh, I can't move like this. I shouldn't move like this." It doesn't need to be anything fancy. It could be like, yeah, literally like take a 5-minute walk, get
Yeah,
up
I
and
think
move around
that
for a minute.
people just get stuck, and that's where it get becomes when the habit is to be seated for 8 hours a day and in that quagmire of stress. That's the habit, and breaking the habit by adding some movement is your pathway out. And then after that, you can progress towards any goal. It just takes being smart, as Yuri mentioned, and having realistic expectations and seeking out the right people who can help you. Like that's why I found Yuri in terms of what I wanted to do with handstands is it's important to find someone who can who can guide you towards whatever goal it is, because sometimes we not sometimes, a lot of the time we get in our own way, and our whatever the limiting beliefs that we have inside of ourselves are going to tell us, well, you can't do this, or you've been trying for 6 months and you still can't do this, you're not meant to do this. And what you need is someone who can see the bigger picture and encourage you in the right direction, to help get you towards those goals. And it is crucial to have a coach on those types of levels so that you can keep going, because we get lost in the forest for the trees, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Understanding, and it's hard to see that yourself, but understanding what's possible and then seeing that path. And sometimes it's hard to see a few years ahead. So somebody looks at, right, they look at me doing hip circles, so I can't move like that. Well, you're not going to move like that today if you haven't. But it's like, what steps can you take today to make that happen in a week, in 6 months, in a year? So it's a really it's a difficult thing to do, but it's a valuable lesson is I'm not gonna reach my goal today. The chances, maybe there's a chance, but it's a very slim chance. In 6 months, there's a bigger chance. It still might be a slim chance in 1 year, in 2 years. So it's like, what steps can you make today, even if they're small ones, that you know you're still going to fail at your goal, but it's a step that gets you closer as opposed to doing nothing. And if you do nothing, time is still going on. So you're not going to, if you do nothing, you're not going to be better in 2 years. But if you do
Yep.
something, you still might not be better in 2 years. There's no guarantee life comes at us, but you're giving yourself a chance. You're giving yourself the opportunity and the conditions for that growth.
And these kinds of things, especially when it comes to movement, if you're somebody who doesn't feel good in your body, a lot of it is that you need movement. And what happens is you start to feel good when you start moving. And also there's a really wonderful thing called becoming. And sometimes, like Yuri's saying, like, let's take my handstands, for example. I've been working on these handstands for a while now. And at first, I didn't know. I just thought it was first, it was fear. I was afraid to be upside down. So you got to get through that. Then it was, oh, I'm just not strong enough. And then I had to figure out it doesn't really have much to do with that. It does some strength, but then I figured out later, I had this terrible shoulder flexibility issue that I had to also work through. And then when I finally met with Yuri in person, he was able to point out some things that I just didn't even realize, like some of the push through and some of the other things. And now I'm still working. Now I thought I would have this in a year because I'm really driven. I'm like, I'll have this. And then there was a point where I also accepted there's not really a deadline. There's not a finish line. The finish line is just going to move, and then I'm going to want to do one hand in it. Like the goalpost move. So just enjoy the process. And one thing that Yuri really I love about some of his instruction is he encourages you to just like play around, like be okay with playing around with it, be okay with falling, get really used to falling down and falling out of it, being courageous about falling, because it makes it more fun rather than, oh my God, I'm so frustrated, I'm not getting anywhere, of just like, it's play, like, it's okay.
Yeah, it's like people that are so goal driven, like the goal is not if that's the only thing that you want to do is to achieve the thing and put a check mark, that's fine. But realistically, if you're in it for the long term, the goal changes, you're going to go off on tangents, you're going to create new things, you might move that goal further, maybe there's more refinement. It's like you never really achieve it. You get a little bit closer and then it moves further away and you keep moving, you can move in different directions. And the play is so important too because everybody's concerned with like how many sets do I do, how many reps do I do, how do I do this. Not that it's not important, because if you only play, there's certain capacities that you're not gonna build, but if you never play, you're limited. You don't explore new pathways, and sometimes you can create something organic that's new, whether it's new to the world, it's probably not new to the world at this point, let's be honest, but it might be new to you, and you might learn new moves just through exploring and through playing, and if you only do the systematic thing, it's never you don't have that same freedom. And it's the same like, I do acting as well, and sometimes people are so stuck with, "I need to know my lines." Like, some of the best moments in film of all time were improvised. It was when somebody fucked up and they rolled with it instead of saying, "Shit, I didn't memorize that. Let's reset." No, don't reset, roll with it, and sometimes you don't know what you're gonna come up with because it's real, it's natural, it's in the moment. And yeah, a lot of people miss that playing and exploration. And I teach the same thing with stretching and mobility. Here's the basic concept. I don't know what it feels like to you. I know what it feels like to me. So I know ways that I'm going to move to explore different pathways. If you explore, you might discover, oh, hey, here's a tight line. Here's some sensation that I didn't realize was there because I hadn't been in this position, as opposed to I'm going to sit here and wait 30 seconds and then I'm going to go to the next one. So, yeah, it's something I encourage. It's just unfortunately you can't systematically write that down on paper. People have tried, but you can't. It's take the
Yeah.
concept and then do something different and explore different pathways. And if
Yeah.
it leads to nothing, fantastic, and if it leads to something, even better. And analogy I've used for this too is like you're walking along a trail. If you only follow the path, still might be nice, but sometimes there's tangents, sometimes there's pathways that lead to interesting views. Sometimes the pathways get you lost and you have to go back. But when you explore all those pathways, you have a much better understanding of the whole path. Say, oh, if you go down this way, there's a really cool cliff. Don't go that way because it's just going to throw you into some shrubs. And now you understand not only the linear path that's already beaten that you've been following, but you have an understanding and knowledge of all these different pathways that it can go.
I love that. I love that. And I remember hearing that or some version of that in the handstand course that I have. And one other thing to pull out from that course that I remember is there's a section where you talk about pain and kind of the exploration of that too. And wonder if you could talk about that for a second, because a lot of times, and I know this as well, especially in the beginning, like working through some restriction and pain that I found in my wrists, I was really worried about it because there's a lot of sensitive stuff in the wrist you got to be careful about. But in at one moment, you encourage just kind of exploring how it feels and where. And it's been really valuable to me of like, okay, today this right wrist is really not happy when I do this. And it's an opportunity to learn rather than what we instinctually sometimes do and we're conditioned to do of like, oh, that hurts, I can't do it. Because sometimes pain is an indication of a limitation, and sometimes it's also just a limit that needs, it's a fear being held on to as well. So if you talk about some of the ways to approach pain and explore pain and how people can work through it
Yeah,
safely.
I have an interesting relationship with pain myself, but It's so I guess from a medical perspective, you can't measure pain. They have the scale of faces. I can't tell you how much something hurts you. And pain is often based on your own experience and your own perceptions. So if you had a wrist injury when you were a kid, like you fell off your bike and you broke your wrist, and then you didn't touch it for 10 years, and now you're doing wrist stretches and say, oh, this hurts. Does it hurt because something is wrong, or does it hurt because you're associating it with a past trauma? And you never know. So pain is it's complicated because the presence of pain doesn't mean that there's something wrong. The absence of pain doesn't mean that everything is fantastic either. It's really based on your own experience and perceptions, and your body goes through all of that history. So if you only spend time in positions where you feel no pain and no discomfort, there's no growth to be had, whether it's from a mobility standpoint, from a strength standpoint, but it's the natural thing to do because we want to survive. So the pain is telling us, hey, this is decreasing your chance of survival. But in reality, if you go towards it to a certain degree, because there's different kinds of pain, there's different kinds of sensations, you go towards it to a certain degree, now you're increasing your versatility of positions you can spend time in, of stress that you're used to, right? It's the same like I use environmental stress as kind of an analogy. It's hot outside, right? So I'm going to spend time in my AC. I'm going to go outside. Oh, it's terrible. I'm going to turn my car AC all the way up. So it's like, but if I just train outside, it sucks. I'm sweating a shitload. But by training outside in that discomfort, I'm building environmental adaptations so I can be more comfortable, not only when it's 70 degrees, but also when it's 90. And then same thing when it's cold out. I'm not going to just sit in the heat. I'm going to also go outside and train because I want to build and condition that uncomfortable idea of, hey, it's cold, but I can still work through this, and that overall makes me stronger as a person. So with pain, you have to I think it's the verbiage I use in the course, you have to log sensations. So there's a
Mhm.
pain that I feel when I stretch. Right now I'm going to stretch my wrist. Okay, there's a little bit of discomfort there, but that's like a normal stretch. If I do the same thing with, let's say, my knee right now, I'm going through kind of a knee tweak. So this knee is giving me sensations that, hey, be careful because I'm not 100%. So that gives me this understanding that I can still train on that leg to a certain degree, but there's certain movements I'm going to go easy on because I'm getting this pain and this sensation. And I can log that, hey, this is probably just tendonitis from overuse or impact or something like that. So I know how to approach that. Uh, And then part of it is getting hurt because you log these sensations. I've also dislocated my knees. I know what that feels like. If I get even a whiff of that, like I'm moving and I get even just one small inkling, I'm done. I'm the fuck out of there because I know what it feels like to dislocate my knee and to have to pop it back. So
Yuck.
based on my experience, I know what these different stretches and sensations feel like. And some of this discomfort, I can stay there, I can breathe through. It doesn't mean that I'm hurt, it just means that my body is resisting it and I can go towards that resistance a little bit. And some sensations, I know they're only associated with bad things, and if I catch that, I wanna avoid it. But that's also through my experience. So it's like if you're only comfortable and you've never experienced different sensations, you have nothing to pull from. So then, like, imagine a baby, a toddler, which is really interesting. They have no perspective. They have no experience. So the first time a toddler might, scrape their leg on the ground, this is not a bad injury by any means, throw some Neosporin on it, whatever. They don't know that. To them, it's the worst thing in the world because it's the first time they've experienced that kind of sensation. Then they grow up a few years later, they're rolling around on the floor, getting scratched up to hell all day because they know that it's not bad. So yeah, it's not something you can quantify other than within yourself. And that's why this exploration is so important. Pain is just a signal. It's not a good or a bad thing, but it tells you something that you can learn from. And it's ultimately the goal. My ultimate goal for what I do and for what I teach other people to do is you're in this vessel. How can you control it? How can you be as aware as possible of what's going on in it? Right? In your car, you got different lights that mean different things. So when your tire pressure is low, there's a light that's going to pop up and you know what to do about it. Okay, I got to fill my tire. Oh, check engine lights on. I got to go to AutoZone and put the thing in the car. Your body gives you these signals too. Not every signal means that something is wrong, but ideally, you know how to read these signals and then you know what the solution would be.
Yeah, it's in especially for high performers. It was a good lesson for me to learn, and I've learned it in a few different ways to become more curious about the pain. Because, like as you said, you know when something big, bad, and ugly is looming in terms of an injury. That said, when you're a high performer, you kind of are always working with some sort of injury. I always have to be careful of this shoulder because of what I did to it 25 feet up in the air on aerial fabric. That's not going to go away, but I have an awareness of where it is and what I need to do to make it keep it functional and happy. Same thing, I've got a knee thing going on. And what I find, especially in some of the high perform, like when you're really high performing and you don't actually stop ever, you just adjust. These injuries sometimes move around and things are functional, but as Yuri is saying, you have to really understand what the signal means to you. And does it mean, okay, let's pull back? Does it mean I need to see my, therapist on something? Does it mean I'm out? And a lot of kind of more, let's call them less high performing athletes will just stop because the doctor says, oh, you have to stop for 6 weeks. Most of us high performers, when we have even something really bad, we're going to see what it is, like how bad is it? And can we keep going, or can we train another part of our body and keep going and let this rest as it needs to? So it's just a really good thing to, like Yuri said, I like that, move towards it sometimes with caution and see what's there and just be curious, and always know every bad injury that I've found in my body has led me to actively strengthen or work on that limitation that's causing that injury so that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah,
So
injuries
there's
aren't
that.
a bad thing. Like, there's not really in life, there's not really a chance of completely avoiding injury, even if you're not an athlete. So
True.
that's part of it too, is how do you deal with it and what can you learn? Like, I've had a lot of injuries that I learned a rehab process. I didn't know this was a thing before. Now, if that happens to me again, or if it happens to someone else, hey, this is what I learned from my injury. Hopefully, this can help you. And yeah, like working around it, I think not going to go on that tangent of the whole medical industry and how they operate, but yeah,
Let's
it's
not
like,
go there, but just knowing that I'm totally with you that it's always an opportunity. A diagnosis is an opportunity to
yeah.
discover your
And
best
it's like
pathway.
do nothing in general. Do nothing is probably the worst thing that you can do because your body adapts to the stresses placed upon it. So if you do
Mhm.
nothing for 6 weeks, you're training yourself to get better at doing nothing. And yeah,
Mm.
obviously, like you broke your femur. Okay, maybe no, maybe you're not going to be doing leg work for a while, but that doesn't mean do nothing. That
Right.
means find what you can do because, like you said earlier in the conversation, this idea that we live really comfortable lives and the problems that we have in today's life would have been the blessing, the absolute blessing of someone in a few generations ago. And further than that, it's like you had to survive. So at a certain point, this is how I approach an injury is it's how do you regain basic life function as soon as possible? Probably with compensations, because if it wasn't a time where we live in this comfortable environment, you maybe you at least have to walk, you at least have to get around. And then you at least have to do these basic things because at a certain point, you can't survive if you can't do these basic things. And there's less and less of that as society gets more quote unquote civilized. But that's how I approach it too. Like, okay, I messed up my knee. How can I at least walk? Probably walk slowly, but how can I walk as soon as possible? Because I need to be able to walk. How can I? And then, okay, what's the severity of the injury? What paths do I need to take? How long am I going to be limited for? But try to restore basic function if that's allowed, right? If it is like the knee completely can't take weight, okay. what can I still do to activate it? Because, yeah, I don't like this idea of doing nothing, and I think in general, I take a very active approach to rehab. What can you do? Be careful, but if you never place any stress on whether it's an injury or not, if you never stress it, it's never gonna get stronger.
right? And there's umpteen million stories that you can find about individuals who were severely injured, and a medical practitioner kind of told them they would never do X again. And that individual went on to go way beyond X. So just remember, no matter where you are in life, no matter what the injury or any limitation, if you so choose, there's always a way around it, and just always stick to your desires and goals and find a way. If there's a way, find a way, because it's going to always be a better pathway, in my opinion, to look for solutions rather than sit there and be like, oh, this happened to me and I'm just so devastated and I can't do X anymore. Just figure out what you can do.
Yeah,
If, and
just
if you want
perspective.
to, yeah. And it can, I've just seen it so many times.
And same thing, a friend of mine from Cirque, like years ago, he had a really bad ankle injury. He had to get some kind of experimental, like titanium mesh in his ankle or something. And the doctor said, "Hey, get a desk job because he was a tumbler, like really high level tumbler." And doctor was like, "Hey, get a desk job because you're probably never going to run again, let alone do multiple flips." And then he says, "Okay, we'll see about that." And
That's it.
sure enough, he was back to performing, back to doing high level stuff. Again, had limitations, still had pain and stiffness in the ankle because it was a bad injury, but yeah, it's that
Yeah.
same idea. You're going to find a way to do it, or you're not going to find a way to do it, and that's your own perspective. And this
Yeah.
reminds me too. When I lived in Vegas, there was a guy walking around the block with an oxygen tank, and I thought about it this like looking at him, the judgment can go two directions. The first one is, oh man, he's got an oxygen tank hooked up. What did he do to make his life so shitty? On the other hand, maybe he's just making the best out of a shitty situation. Dude's going for a walk, right? You don't know. So yeah, you have that choice. And
Yeah.
I don't know what choice that guy was making, but it's
Funny that you
better
say
not
that,
to
because
judge.
I saw a guy recently. I was getting my car, the oil changed, and there was a guy, that guy, he had an oxygen tank. And because I'm so into breath work and breathing right now, I approached him and said, hey, is that oxygen? Tell me about that. And his story was he got COVID, and he was, had a pretty severe case, and was told that he couldn't recover. And he's like, I just said, no, what do you got? Give me some, if you think I need to have some oxygen, let's go, because I got a life to live. And I just thought it was a really cool conversation, because you're right. You can never know someone's story unless you ask. And everyone is dealing with something, and you never know what it is. So it's always a choice.
And yeah, the other thing I like to say is, and sometimes tell myself so too, because we all have that self-limiting, the doubts, is if you want to do something, you'll either find a way to do it or you'll find an excuse not to do it. But it's on
Totally.
you. Like I said, there are always steps you can take, even though they might be minimal, even though they might seem trivial. If you take those steps, you'll be a lot further in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years than if you just conceded to doing nothing.
Amen. I'd like to shift, if you're okay with it, to asking you a little bit about your stunt career and your pursuit of acting, because I think there's a lot of value in the space of auditioning and acting and failing and staying with it. Because I did some work in the film industry for a while. It was not my cup of tea, because I like a reaction out of an audience, and on a film set, as you know, there's a lot going on, but the crew is conditioned to not react to what you're doing. So how did you, I know you mentioned going to Vegas and getting into stunt work, but how did you get into that line of work? And what is your experience right now in terms of auditioning? Because I know also a lot of auditions are done on, video nowadays.
Yeah, so basically I wasn't sure. This was like during COVID. I saw an ad for an acting class and I was like, "Hey, I'm not doing anything. I'll go take it." And it really interesting. I knew that it was something that I should pursue the first class because one of the exercises we did was you stand up in front of everyone, you find an eye line, You find stillness, and then you either make shit up or you talk about a topic that you know. And I was nervous. And I thought to myself, "Why am I nervous? This is literally what I do for a living, and I have no problem with it, and I'll give that same speech in front of hundreds of people, and I don't care. And now there's 10 people looking at me. Why am I nervous?"
It's the
So
worst.
right.
I know that
So,
feeling.
like, knowing that that made me nervous was like, "Okay, this is something to pursue," and there's a lot of
Mhm.
interesting lessons. With film acting, it's even more so it's good and bad compared to live action, but it's like what I talked about is that long term. It's that you don't know how it's gonna be put together. All you can do is give it your best in the moment, and it's not gonna look like anything yet. It's not gonna look like anything for another 6 months or a year when it gets cut, and it's not gonna be entertaining in the moment, but you have to imagine that you're one piece of this huge machine with multiple gears, and you give it your best, and then hopefully, all of that process can come through to create something entertaining. So I like not knowing
Mm.
and seeing what happens, and then you see that feedback maybe through the monitor, maybe later when the film comes out, but not knowing right away because it teaches you not to wait for that feedback and just to do your best and to forget about it. And I think in general, like film acting, especially right now, there's a high level of stoicism you have to have of basically like creating and destroying something. You create a sandcastle, you put your best work into it, the tide washes it. It was a great sandcastle. Now I'm off because you get an audition and then you put some work into it, but you don't want to put too much because the expectation is that you're not even going to hear anything back. The expectation is you're given sides, you do this audition, you send it in. Number one, you're probably not going to get the part. You just have to be okay with that. And the reason you're not gonna get the part could be for a number of things. It might not be your performance, it might be your height, your hair color, your weight, your eye color, some silly shit like that. So you can't dwell on it. You give it your best performance in as short of a time as possible without putting a whole lot of commitment into it, and then you forget about it. And then if you hear back, fantastic, but you don't expect to hear back. So the way I use auditions, unless I have a bunch and I'm swamped and I'm just like, fuck, I gotta get this done. I think of it as a free acting class. Like, what do you do in an acting class? You're given a script, you learn the lines, you perform it. So there you go. It's a free class, it's a free lesson. It's not something where I have an expectation that I can fail at. You can't fail. You do the thing, you give it your best, and if something comes out of it, fantastic. If not, you just had another lesson where hopefully you can do the next thing better. So it's like you don't think about acting being this stoic process, but it really is. And yeah, most auditions are done online now. So you set your shit up at home, you do your thing, and then you send it in and maybe you get something, maybe you don't. Stunts is a little bit different, but what I like about doing stunts is they'll have to fix it. So it's one of those things. I mean, acting as well, but stunts even more so because there's a bigger risk factor involved. Is usually I'm all over the place. I'm thinking about too many different things at once. It's one of those things that really puts you in the moment because it's not just, first of all, you have this choreography, you have this task that you're supposed to do. With stunts, it's at a higher level because you're trying to control it, but look out of control. Then you have the camera awareness, you have the crew, you have the pressure of having to do it potentially with minimal warm up in a short amount of time. And it's one of those things that just focuses me in the moment. And there's not too many things that do that for me, but when I have something where, hey, I'm not thinking about anything else right now, then I know that it has extraordinary value for me.
That's incredible, perspective because I think that all the things that you hear of like be in the moment, stay in the moment, it's just so and it's such a hard task for people to do no matter what who you are and what you're doing with all of the media and stimulus and worries and things, all the things. to actually be in the moment is a pretty hard thing. So it's a profound thing to hear of something. Well, because you're very much fine tuned, like do not die, do not get hurt. Execute it as best of your ability for the least amount of times, because I imagine that stunt work takes an incredible amount of energy. So you have to be careful about like big bursts of energy for it to work. That is a really
It's
good
energy,
point.
and it's even more so like Scott Adkins, talked about this in a podcast that he did where it's a lot harder to some depending on what you're doing. Like, you're filming a fight scene, that's a lot harder physically than actually being in a UFC fight or a boxing match, for example, because, okay, boxing match, energetically, 12 rounds, it's one of the most difficult things that anyone can do, 100%, right? You see, oh, they're having trouble putting keeping their hands by their face in the 12th round, like, yeah, you would be literally dead if you tried to do that, like, the shape that these guys are in, but for a stunt fight, you might be filming for 12 hours
Yeah.
and you might have had to warm up several times in that 12 hours,
Oh
and
yeah.
you might have to be doing high energy things, big falls. So, yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, and there's, a lot that people don't realize. Layers, that's what I like about the film world in general, is, like, there's these layers. It looks simple, and even to act, it's not like, again, I was on a film shoot this weekend, and it seems simple. Walk 3 steps, land on your mark, deliver a line, stay in the frame, stay in focus. It's really simple. You're just walking 3 steps and then saying a sentence. How hard can it be? You'd be surprised,
Oh yeah.
especially when there's pressure on you. So
Oh
it's
my gosh.
people don't realize the depth and the layer of complexity that involves even coordinating simple things like that and how many more moving parts there are than you think, because it's not just the actor and the camera. There's a whole crew, there's sound, there's script supervisor, there's layers, and I like the complexity. I like knowing that there's a lot more to it than just a thing that you see.
Think as you can see, folks, there's a lot more to Yuri than meets the eye as well. He's a super fascinating guy. One more thing I wanted to touch upon, because I found it really fascinating, and I'm probably opening Pandora's box when we're getting close to the end, but I'll ask you anyways. I noticed that you had a lot of specific feelings about nutrition. And I consider myself pretty strong at nutrition right now because I'm specific to what I do in my sport. Talk to me about how your approach to nutrition for a second and why you feel that way.
Yeah, so I've gone through a lot of people ask me, and I've gone through a lot of those fads, like anything that has a name. Basically, if this diet has a name, let's be realistic, kind of going back to that living in comfort. You live in a world, a lot of people want to complain about how shitty it is living in 2023. You're living in one of the best times in human history. You can walk to the store and get any food you want at any time of the year, and you don't understand. Like, if you gave that concept to someone a generation ago, 3 generations, 10 generations, it would have been like this is Valhalla. This is not real life. So just being grateful for that and the problems that you have where you can say, "Oh, I'm eating vegan, I'm eating a paleo diet, I don't eat this, I'm eating low sodium, Mediterranean." You live in such a privileged world, and if you're not grateful for that, you're already doing yourself a disservice. But that being said, a lot of the common nutrition practices that are taught and given to people are not the best, and a lot of that comes from nutrition as a business, right? So there's going to be a big difference between a small time local family owned farm producing food versus a giant mega multi-billion dollar corporation producing food. And the best thing that I try to do is I don't have a diet with a name. I try to eat real food and I try to shop local and I try to support as many local farmers as I can. And I try to eat like imagine it was 3, 4 generations ago. What would your great grandparents consider a proper meal? Would right? So then you get into all this packaged stuff and all of this stuff with extra ingredients that don't make sense. Like I think we had this conversation even at the gym, right? If you were to bake a loaf of bread, what are the ingredients? Flour, water, yeast, salt, maybe, some olive oil or something like that. Simple ingredients. If you go to the store and you pick up a random loaf of bread, there's going to be 30 ingredients, 25 of which you don't even know what they are. And then there's
Mhm.
a lot of unnecessary things too, like they have enriched flour. Oh, it sounds nice. They're putting vitamins in there. Well, what are they putting in there? And why do you need that? And why is it the default? And then again, I don't even know if this is true because this is another rabbit hole. You can find videos where people smash up cornflakes made with enriched flour, and they can pull out the pieces of iron that's how they enrich it. They put flakes of iron in it, and they're able to pull those out with a magnet. I can't verify that, so I don't know if that's bullshit or not. But basically, I think about supporting local farmers, eating real seasonal food that comes from somewhere within your general vicinity, because we talk about the environment. How much of your food is being flown across the world using resources? And then another thought of that is it's like if you're eating local food, it's attuned to your environment. So it might be a little bit of a hippie pathway, but if you're eating food that was grown in whatever, Brazil, and then shipped to Thailand for processing and then shipped to the US, you're not getting a lot of those benefits from the local biome for like they talk about raw honey. Local raw honey is good for allergies because you're eating the things that are in your environment. So shop local, shop seasonal, eat real food, and then think about what are the actual ingredients of this food. And if I go to the store and I get something, what is this extra shit? Why is it in there? And is it in there because it makes the food better? Or is it in there because it makes the food cheaper to manufacture? So,
Mhm.
food made by people, that's another one, made by people who care versus food made in a factory by machines that gets shipped. Because getting into another thing, like I was at a local market I was shopping at, there were some oatmeal cookies. And this is not a healthy food by any means, right? But the ingredients of these were like, flour, oatmeal, sugar, raisins, butter, lard. Like if you made cookies 100 years ago, those are the ingredients that you would use. And then likely, because it was just made in a non-USDA inspected kitchen, these are probably local ingredients as well. Compared to you get cookies in the store, you don't know where they're made. They're not made by people who care about what they do. They're made by people who are paid minimum wage or less, just trying to clock out for the day. And yeah, basically there's a lot to food that goes beyond just the food and just the nutrition. So the best advice that I can give that I try to follow, shop local. It's better if you pay your farmers directly at the farmers market, because if you go to the store, even if you buy the same shit, it's a middleman. It's better to give directly to help support their business. They're a small business, they need that support, and they're probably eating their own stuff, right? Your local farmer who's growing potatoes is probably also eating those potatoes for dinner. A commercial farmer who has thousands of acres of commercially grown and sprayed potatoes, they're probably not touching those, like not even going near them. So
Oh, yeah.
just just things to think about. Your food is more than your food. There's a whole ecosystem. And then also with with COVID and the supply chain disruptions, if you're dependent on national and international distribution to eat your food, that's that's a volatile thing. If you're dependent on local economy to eat your food, that's not going to crash when there's a uh, like a blocked ship in the Soo Canal or the Panama Canal or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's just
There's a lot to think about there. That's
things
why
to think
thank you
about.
for talking about that because I picked up on all that when I met you in person and I'm like there's some really great philosophy. So as we wrap up, I want you to just share with everybody where they can find you, which I know in social media, Yuri is a super fascinating person to follow, and also anything that you have coming up that someone might want to look into that we need to know about.
Oh yeah, so it's just my name, Yuri Marmerstein. It's really easy to find, really easy to search for. There's already not a lot of Yuris. There's only one person with my actual name, as far as I know. So pretty easy to find. And you can also spot me by the way I look. It's also makes me easier to find. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, that's where I generally post the most. I got some ebooks and instructional courses that I sell, so you can check those out. I have a lot of free content too, so if you want to watch the free content, go for it. If you want to buy something, it helps me pay my bills. I appreciate that. Got a couple workshops coming up. Workshops have been a little bit slower lately, but I got one in Cleveland this week, so probably actually won't be out when the podcast comes out. In September, I'll be going to LA. So actually, the reps courses, we're redoing the whole thing. We're going to be filming another workshop and then additional content in the studio as well. So that whole course is going to be redone and a lot's going to be added to it. So that workshop in LA, it's going to be limited spots, but you can get in there if you message the right people. And I think in December, I'm going to Rhode Island for a workshop, somewhere in that area, like Rhode Island, Boston area. Other than that, yeah, trying to do stuff.
Do stuff. So follow Yuri on social media, and I know you can also catch a glimpse of his most recent stunt reel, which is really fun to watch. And I've got the reps course, and I also have this really cool PDF that you can access probably through Yuri's link tree. It's called the Physical Philosophy Compendium, and it's really badass. It's a compilation of a bunch of different movement types. And what's really great about it is there's videos attached to this PDF that you can access and download that gives you progressions wherever you are with these skills. And I mean, pretty much when I got this, I'm like, I pretty much can work the rest of my life with this document alone and progress through all these different types of skills and become a badass in 10 years time. So that is a really great resource if you're curious about adding some interesting new movements, and maybe you just are starting them. It's a really very nicely progressed thing to get a hold of. And that's, I highly recommend you guys finding some of Yuri's in-person classes, because he has a really thorough and gentle and also direct way of coaching you to access skills and knowledge that you just had no idea you could tap into.
Yep, I
Any last
second.
thoughts?
No, I second that. I agree.
Thank you so much again, Yuri, for joining us today. And we will stay tuned and follow along, because you just never know in the acting world where somebody's going to hit that interesting project and be all over the place. And in case you were wondering, because Yuri mentioned, if you're just listening to this podcast, look for the guy with the big red beard, and that's Yuri.
Yep.